happening? All right, get a just thumbs up if you can hear me. All right. I affirm that corporations should be banned from making political donations. My main argument breaks down into two main parts, the first of which is about rights. Proponents of corporations being to donate to campaigns argue that the donation is a freedom of branches as individuals, thus granting them ability to donate. The first problem with this is that there's legal precedent for the opposite. In Austin versus Michigan Chamber of Commerce, it was ruled corporations should not be treated like people. The second problem with this has to do with the idea that my rights start where your rights end, insofar as corporations A are able to coordinate thousands of people effectively and B have more money to give. They're in a sense inherently have much more free speech than everyone else. It's like the government is saying you're allowed to speak, but corporations are allowed to yell over you. The second part of my argument is about how corporate donations pragmatically affect elections. First, it's important to note that corporate donations are skyrocketing. They were at 31 million in 1980 and hit 2 billion from Wall Street alone in the 2016 presidential campaign. This is important for two reasons. First, money is a necessity to win elections. The American Journal of Political Science writes, quote, "No matter how persuasive the candidate's message, it will not do any good if voters do not hear it. So the money is, if not sufficient, is almost certainly necessary." In fact, BYU estimates 1 million spent on a campaign results in a 3% vote increase. The money is important because, as Stanford University writes, quote, "Outside groups devoted to special interests or narrow ideological positions now wield enormous influence in the legislative agenda." Baylor University quantifies this by saying that political donations influence economic policy more than the unemployment rate. And the Center for American Progress adds that these policies are normally bad, emphasizing rent-seeking as one of the outcomes. Baylor University frames the impact here nicely, stating, quote, "If a key characteristic of an American democracy is the continued responsiveness of the government to the preferences of its citizens, considered as political equals, the democratic process in the United States appears to fall short of this standard." The second reason an increase in money is pragmatically bad for our country goes to how that money is spent. According to Temple University, press ads are becoming increasingly negative as years goes by. And this, once again, bad for the democratic system because, as according to the University of Michigan, every time you see one of these negative ads, your chances of turning out to vote also decrease by 14.4%. This lowers the voter turnout and, as a result, decreases the representativeness of our democracy. Additionally, more money on campaign ads is going to mean that there's more misleading ads, which according to Yale University are becoming more and more prevalent. And this is really bad because if we want to have a representative democracy, which all the other impacts that I've already said go into, then people who are more misinformed turning out to vote are going to really affect policy decisions and that the most representative candidate doesn't get voted into office. For these reasons, I negate.
Okay, it's funny because hey, this debate is like your first debate trying to run through everything really fast, and I figured I was going to go really slow to match you. But okay, so the resolution of this debate states corporations should be banned from making political donations. The word banned, according to Merriam-Webster, is to prohibit by legal means, thus making donations from corporations illegal. A corporation is defined as a company or group of people authorized to act as a single entity, legally as a person, and recognized as such by law. The first reason why corporations should not and cannot be banned is simply because of what a corporation is defined to be by law. By law, a corporation is a group of people authorized by law to act as a single entity. They are legally considered to speak as a person and are recognized as such by law. The second reason corporations should not be banned is because it is not logical to ban corporations from making political donations. According to LegalZoom.com, in order to become a corporation, a minimum of 3 people are needed to complete the paperwork and become a corporation. So am I to believe that 1 or 2 people putting their money together to donate to a politician they like is okay, but when they get that third person, now what they are doing is either immoral or illegal? That's not rational at all. Or is it that one person has amendment rights to the freedom of speech and 2 people together still have the right to freedom of speech, but when that third person joins them, then they forfeit their rights of freedom of speech? Considering that by law, a corporation is recognized as legally one person, we are now talking about restricting the freedom of speech to individual people, and that sounds a lot like discrimination. Okay, so my opponents talked about the corporations give more money to individuals, which is not true, because if you look at the Hillary Clinton, George Soros donated more money than any corporation did. So that's a negative right there. Also, I'm going to bring this up later on. He brought up one court case that did that. Well, in my next term, I'm going to bring up a Supreme Court ruling that I believe will trump that one. With that being said, I'll go ahead and pass the mic.
All right, going down what he said in chronological order. So he he defined a corporation as being defined as an entity of a lot of people that is legally one person. And I think that this is a really nuanced definition for a few reasons. So the only reason it's defined like that is because of the legal precedent that it holds, right? And in this debate, we're arguing about whether or not a corporation should be defined on that. That's obviously one of the points. As he, brings up next, he gives a reason for why it should be defined like that. So I think that's up to interpretation, and you shouldn't just buy the legal definition legality of that in the first place, so it doesn't really hold a lot of water. Second, this is tautological, right? He's saying corporations should be allowed to donate because the Supreme Court says they should be allowed to donate, right? This isn't ever really an argument that anybody would ever bring up in real life, so don't buy it here. It's tautological, it's a logical fallacy. And likewise, I'd like to point out that he goes on later to talk about how this is a restriction of freedom of speech, right? And that this seems like discrimination and all this stuff about individual rights, right? There's instances, and he can't deny this, that where we do restrict freedom of speech, obviously, right? The cliche example is if you're in a movie theater and somebody else fire, and people die trying to get out when there's not really a fire, right? That's something you're not allowed to do, and that's a restriction on your freedom of speech because pragmatically it's bad. So I'd like to offer up my arguments about how it'll decrease representation through policy that doesn't represent the people. It'll increase misinformation in the election. It'll decrease turnout. All these things are prerequisites to him winning that argument, because if I win that they're pragmatically bad, he doesn't have any ground to stand on that we should just have unlimited free speech, right? That doesn't really make any sense. And then he goes in, his last argument is the argument that's justifying why corporations should be treated as people. And he says, a corporation is defined as 3 or more people. Why is the 2 people getting together to donate okay? And 3 people not okay? I would say that 2 people getting together to donate still isn't okay, because they still have a disproportionate influence over the single individual that would. So it doesn't even really matter. And like I said, my arguments are still a priori to this. So even if you don't buy my arguments about why corporations are individual, you should buy the pragmatic arguments first.
Okay, so in my first argument, I'm going to highlight a Supreme Court ruling from 2010. The Supreme Court ruled that free speech rights permit groups like corporations and labor unions to directly spend on political campaigns. This was for many reasons, but I will mention 2. Reason 1, if corporations were banned from making political donations, then a political party with a majority could then also ban political speech of media corporations like CNN or MSNBC. Media corporations also accumulate wealth with the help of their corporate form, may have aggregations of wealth, and may express views having little or no correlation to the public support for the views. Differential treatment of media corporations and other corporations cannot be squared with the First Amendment, and there is no support for the view that the amendment's original meaning will permit suppressing media corporations' political speech. Reason 2, it is irrelevant for First Amendment purposes that corporate funds may have a little or no correlation to public support for the corporation political ideas. All speakers, including individuals and the media, use money amassed from the economic marketplace to fund their speech, and their First Amendment protects that resulting speech. And the First Amendment protects that resulting speech. All speakers, including individuals and the media, use money amassed from the economic marketplace to fund their speech, and the First Amendment protects that resulting speech. I would ask my opponent, what donation given to a politician is not for a desired outcome, whether it be by people or whether it be by corporations? Second, what donation to any organization, like if I donate to the Puerto Rico Recovery Fund, it is to help the individuals of Puerto Rico. If I donate to a candidate for mayor, it is because he has promised to do something that directly speaks to something that I feel is important. How is that different from many corporations? And like I said, once you start trying to restrict and ban freedom of speech, then you have to do corporations. So like I said, the Supreme Court showed that you can't ban one corporation without banning all corporations. And once you start banning corporations, then you have to start banning media corporations also, like CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and something like that, which does violate the freedom of speech.
All right, so I'll just respond directly to his question. What donation is not for a desired outcome? And I guess I don't really deny that people are donating for their desired outcomes. That's pretty obvious. But this gets back into what I said in my first speech, right? That they inherently will always have more free speech than you, right? Not only are they able to garner a lot more money because they're made up of more powerful interests inherently, right? They're able to organize easier, right? If corporations are able to donate to political campaigns and get their candidate into office, which the evidence clearly shows that they're able to do, once they're in office, they're able to influence policy outcomes a lot more efficiently, right? they're able to lobby more easily. They're able to, donate to future campaigns more easily and perpetuate the cycle that way. There's lots of things that allow them to have much more influence over, the average Joe who's just donating. And right, I don't think that that's really fair, because insofar as the average Joe can't go and do all these things once the candidate's in office, the average Joe can't influence campaigns as much, right? These corporations will often argue, advocate for things that aren't for the public interest, right? Baylor University cites that rent seeking is one of these, and this is extremely harmful to the average consumer, especially those who are at the bottom of the of the income bracket, right? Who probably can't afford to donate in the first place. These policies are going to be the ones that hurt them the most. And he hasn't touched on my interpretation of the resolution, so I'm just going to have to assume that he agrees to it, that we have to prefer pragmatism over the constitutionality debate, right? Because there can always be restrictions on freedom of speech, right? And going into the freedom of speech, he cites two reasons that the Supreme Court said that they're going to be limiting, or they won't be limiting freedom of speech. One is because it would allow political parties to ban media organizations. I don't think that this is a very uncharitable interpretation of what would happen, because there's definitely a pro world where corporations are banned from making this, and where you can still have a protection that protects media corporations' autonomy and their freedom of speech in that way. I don't think you should buy that argument, because it's not inherent to either side. And then he just said that it's the First Amendment, that your speech is your money is your speech, and you should be able to donate it where you want. And I haven't argued in this round for individuals not being able to do that. But insofar as the entire reason that he's arguing for individuals to do this is because he classifies a corporation as individual, which is this tautological logic that I'm talking about before, that the only reason he thinks it should be that way is because the Supreme Court said it anyway. That's not a good enough argument. In addition, he concedes all of my impacts about greater increased voter turnout, greater, these policy initiatives that are going to be influenced, right? All these things, and he concedes the interpretation, right? So insofar as he concedes all my impacts, right, voter turnout decrease, policy changes, and it becomes necessary to win with money, which increases money even more, right, and perpetuates the other two. That's going to be a big reason, because he agrees that pragmatism has to be preferred over the constitutionality debate, which is tautological in the first place.
Okay, so my opponent so far is trying to shoot down all my points with what ifs. So far, I brought up that Soros donated, as an individual, donated more than a corporation did to Hillary Clinton. He just went over that. And then impact voter turnout. There's a lot of things that may impact a whole lot of things, but that's still not a fact or anything else. Correlation to money raised and money spent. So next point I want to say is this. So a Minneapolis bar has closed down after employees and event hosts learned that the bar that they worked for donated to the 2016 Senate campaign of David Duke, the Holocaust denier and former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, who has espoused anti-Semitic views. Club Jaeger shut down after several employees and constituents decided they no longer wanted to work for and visit the bar. So let me just sum this up without going there. So one of the positives about corporations being able to donate is that is records kept in the public view. And I, as a citizen, would like to know the political stance of companies that I spend my money to, and how their political parties are. Next, and talking about this, so Clinton raised $1.2 billion for her campaign. $1.2 billion. Donald Trump spent half of that, and yet Trump still won. So a lot of this what ifs and kind of sorters and this, I've brought to you actual facts of stuff that has actually happened as far as a Supreme Court case that the First Amendment right, and that they said there's no way the First Amendment can deem being able to restrict corporations over here without restricting the media corporations over here, which is a fact. And then I brought up the fact that Soros donated more than any corporation to Hillary Clinton, which is still not opinion, which is still a fact. The Clinton campaign, Democratic Party, and pro-Clinton expenditure committees and PACs spent a record $1.2 billion, twice as much as the $600 million laid out by Trump campaign. And yet Hillary Clinton still lost. So there's no direct correlation between money being raised by individuals and money being raised by corporations and who's actually elected.
All right. So first, I'm just going to touch on the George Soros thing. So I never said that corporations being banned from contributing to political campaigns would solve this problem 100%. So just because some individuals are still able to donate large amounts of money doesn't mean that we still would live in a world that is marginally better if we ban corporations from making these donations. That's you just can't deny that less money would still be good. And by saying that, he sort of also concedes the point that money's bad, because he's like, well, we'd still have people donating money, right? So I don't really know why he would bring up George Soros if that wasn't the case. He then tries to attack my voter turnout argument by saying, well, voter turnout may go down. He doesn't cite that. Well, no, the University of Michigan cites that when this increased amount of campaign finance is spent on negative campaign ads, which a majority of campaign ads are, right, voter turnout decreases by 14.4%. Don't let him just naysay this away by saying, well, I don't really think that's true. Make him provide you an actual study or statistic that gets rid of that, right? We have a less representative democracy, uncontested, in a world where corporations are allowed to donate to political campaigns. Then he said that he would like it if corporations were able to donate to political campaigns because their funds are public. One, this isn't always true. If the company isn't publicly traded, then they don't have to publicly disclose where their money goes, right? That doesn't make any sense. And two, a lot of the times these corporations are going to be filing their money through other like legal entities like 501c4s, right? So you still wouldn't be able to know that. And third, he doesn't give you the impact of being able to know where the money comes from. So don't buy this argument at all. Then he tries to attack my thing about how you need money to win an election by saying, oh, well, you see, Trump won in 2016 and he spent double of Hillary. And I will admit that he did spend more, and that's 100% factual. But any modern literature on campaign finance will tell you that this is an extreme anomaly because the country was in an extremely unique position, and that Trump had an extremely unique base that was able to rally behind him. And I don't think he can really deny this. 30 years of campaign finance literature points to the fact, right, that this will win races. And I'm not even talking 100% about presidential races. He doesn't respond to anything that can be easily, right, applied to congressional races or state house races, right? All these races, right, where you don't have these extremely loyal, voter bases that are going to vote for you and get out there and do work in that way, right? And I have the logic on my side, right? If there's more money, you're able to get your name out there more, right? And one of the reasons that it's widely accepted that Trump won is because the media would talk about him so much, right? And that his name would get out there more. So you can't really deny that money, at least marginally, has to help your campaign. And this is why BYU estimates that $1 million spent directly correlates to a 3% voter increase. This is just fact. And don't let him just naysay it away with, I don't think that would really be true.
Okay. So far, I've heard a whole lot of facts and emotions and a whole lot of what ifs and stuff like that. Not specifically directly what ifs, but a whole lot of stuff that's based on his opinion. Okay, so right now, just found something on the Hill.com. New report finds that voter turnout in 2016 topped 2012. Okay, so that is an increase right there. And all I did was do one quick Google. There's a nice picture there of more voters cast ballots in November's election than when President Obama won the election in 2012. Okay, so that's one right there. Now, as I said, when we talk about this, he's saying that all these studies and stuff like that, and everybody knows studies only as good as what the study shows. As in, if I pull up a study here, he can just Google and find a study that says the opposite. That is why I'm going off historical facts and the historical stuff that can be looked at and can be viewed. Fact, according to the Hill, voter registration, at least voter turnout, went up. Fact, George Soros donated more to Hillary Clinton than any corporation did. So that's still showing that corporations are not this great enemy that he's bringing up. Fact, Hillary Clinton had way more money, way more everything than Trump. But what happened? The political party, if you remember those political campaigns, at least the voter turnout in election, the whole country was red, which showed that even though she spent way more money than he did, way more, twice as much, that public opinion was still on his side, that voter turnout wasn't swayed by what was spent. So while I could stay here and keep going over just what ifs and kind of sorters, what I've shown is facts that support mine as opposed to just what ifs and kind ofs.
All right. So first, I'd like to point out that Hillary actually did win the 2016 election by the popular vote. So if we're going by my studies, which are still corroborated by what I say, then the increase in money does buy those votes, right? In fact, according to 538, this is not only that, but if you were able to spread around 85,000 votes that were a surplus for Hillary in some states to other states, the graph would have 100% switched. So for him to come out and to say, no, you disregard 30 years of academic research because I can point you to historical examples. No, this is why we have studies, so that we don't look at historical examples in a vacuum and try to base policy that's going to affect hundreds and hundreds of years of campaigns off this, right? Not only that, so he tries to say like, oh, well, voter turnout went up in 2016, right? and more money was spent in 2016. So how could this lead to a decrease in voter turnout, right? One, he completely brushes by all my arguments that I make that completely dismantle anything he has to say about the 2016 election, because this was a very unique election. Don't let him come back to it now, because I'm not going to have a time to respond at this point, right? But then my argument isn't even that the voter turnout wasn't going to go up in 2016, or it was going to go up in 2016, right? It's that in a world where there were no corporate campaign contributions, the voter turnout would have been higher. And this is just corroborated by my research. It doesn't, there's just no denying this. Don't let him just like nitpick these like little examples that are extremely unique, right? And a majority of this, right? Even if you want to say, okay, well, it wouldn't apply to presidential elections, you can still apply this to congressional elections. I dare him to name one congressional election, right, in which a similar campaign structure was observed and then something didn't happen, right? It just can't be done, right? Don't let him say, I'm going to be naming historical examples, because the reason we have academia, the reason that we have people who look over this data is to say, here's all the historical examples of the last 30 years. Here's the trend. Don't let him say, well, here's one that doesn't follow that trend, so I have to be right. That just doesn't make any sense. That's a logical fallacy, and it just doesn't. Nobody would ever buy that argument in real life. Lastly, prefer pragmatism. All the arguments about freedom of speech, he's completely conceded to this point that there should be limits on freedom of speech. If you don't respond to it, you're conceding it, buddy. Like, I'm sorry that I replied and then you didn't say anything. That's a concession, right? There should be restrictions on freedom of speech if it's pragmatically bad. And even if you don't buy the voter decrease argument, with the voter turnout argument, which I logically have on my side, evidence shows I have on my side, right? You can still buy my argument that policy is going to change, because one, corporations are able to coordinate more easily, which he never responds to. And two, right? When you're able to donate to these campaigns, these people are going to be in your pocket. And Baylor University even quantifies this with an example, which I know he's going to love so much, that the unemployment rate determines less of economic policy than the amount that people spend on political campaigns. It just doesn't make sense, because people who are at the bottom, who need this help the most, won't be affected. Prefer pragmatism over constitutionality. You have to vote pro based on the impacts.
Okay, so all right. So first I went over corporations are legally defined as speaking as one person. So going back to the title, is corporations should be banned from making political donations. So that means for what is now legal, you should, if you vote for him, you're voting that you should go from legal to making this illegal. So right now, corporations are legally defined as speaking as one person. There's no reason why that should be changed. In order to be a corporation, only 3 people are required. And how is it rational to ban 3 people from getting together to make a political donation? Next, it is protected by the Constitution as freedom of speech, which is a fact. So that means to ban this and make it illegal, you would have to change the wording of the First Amendment. Fourth, the Supreme Court found that there is no difference between the way the media corporations and non-media corporations make money, and you can't ban one without banning the other. And the media corporations are protected by the freedom of speech. Once again, by the Constitution. If anyone donates any money at all, whether it be political or not, it is because they believe it is for a desired outcome. That's whether it's people, whether it's corporations, or whether it's a church donating to the Red Cross. Next, just because a person makes more money than the other doesn't mean that the correlation to public opinion, as seen in the presidential election, considering Hillary spent $1.2 billion and Trump spent half that amount, is actually going to go and I'm making sure I have the right time, is going to actually result in a win in the election. Hillary's biggest donors were individuals, not corporation. George Soros alone donated $8 million to Hillary Clinton, yet she still lost the election. Now, if you want to donate, if you want to go ahead and talk about electoral college versus popular vote, it doesn't matter, because the president is still Trump. And that's a whole different debate altogether. Next, corporations who donate to political campaigns have to publicly release those records, and it is good for citizens to know these opinions. Now, at no point did I ever talk about, and I will actually say that you're right, I did not talk about and say that there should be restrictions on free speech. However, I'll say this now, I do not believe there should be restrictions on free speech. Hate speech is still protected by the First Amendment. Kneeling down in a football game is still protected by the First Amendment. So, like that, like I said, between all those and the correlation that there is no actual correlation between money spent and elections won, I feel you must vote for me. So I have 28 seconds left, but do you have? Okay, let me go ahead and pass just in case.
I guess I get to use the rest of my time. I honestly don't really know how the time works, but I guess I'll just start on the last thing he said there about freedom of speech. So yeah, I totally agree that hate speech should be covered under the Constitution. I agree that kneeling at a football game should be covered under the Constitution of free speech. But there are things that aren't because pragmatically they're just bad. They can't have any goods, right? Yelling fire in a crowded movie theater is obviously more pragmatically bad than it's good. Libel and slander are against the law, yet the free speech should say we should be allowed to do them. Why? Because it's pragmatically bad. I would argue that instances where people who disproportionately can affect campaigns do so and influence policy to the point where they're promoting things like, according to Baylor University, promoting things like rent seeking, right, which are going to affect the lower echelons of society, right? This is a pragmatically bad thing. He tries to bring up the fact, one, that you don't really win elections with money. That's not really true. Literature, BYU says otherwise, right? He tries to point to the campaign, right, of that otherwise, right? But like I said, Hillary won the popular vote. So obviously money can buy votes, right? Maybe it can't buy every single presidential election if it's in an extremely, unique landscape, which he never responds to of why it's not extremely unique and why we should use one example over 30 years of analyzing data of many elections. He never responds to that. But then lastly, he tries to say, well, George Soros, he was the biggest contributor, so it doesn't really matter. And like I said before, I'm not trying to say that I would solve the entire problem. I'm just saying it would be marginally better in a world with less money. You can't deny that there's going to be a lower turnout. You can't deny that policy is going to change. You can't deny that pragmatism should be preferred over constitutionality because it gets limited all the time.
I believe I've literally talked about every single thing he says. And like I said, the Supreme Court showed that there was no correlation between money spent and elections won, which is why they deemed it as freedom of speech. Then just talking about election turnout. Then I showed that it was a record amount of money and voter turnout went up. So then we talked about that. And like I said, and then he talks about this Baylor blah 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 Baylor thing. Yet, like I said, Supreme Court looked at the exact same information, and yes, you can take Baylor or you can take the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says there's no correlation between money spent and people who win elections, and then they showed that there's no way that you could ban illegal corporations donating as opposed to news companies, because news companies have freedom of speech and they also raise money the same way other corporations do. Then I showed that even here in the last election that the biggest donators to Hillary Clinton was individuals, not corporations. So corporations aren't the problem. And like I said, there's literally nothing that my opponent has said that should say that all of a sudden that corporations are the biggest problem. Not to mention, I brought the fact that David Duke, who was a Ku Klux Klan member, ran for public office, and the public spending of this corporation being released, that these people wanted to know where their votes were going and wanted to know. And based off that, they were able to say, you know what, I don't want to visit this corporation anymore. I don't want to visit this business anymore. And to me, that is something that I really appreciate. I really do. So let's see. To recap one more time, corporations are legally defined as one person. In order to do a corporation, only 3 people are required. And how is it rational that one person is still freedom of speech, second person is still freedom of speech, but all of a sudden when the third person comes, then it's deemed illegal? That's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. Then I said that voting and doing that and donation is still freedom of speech, whether it be one person, 2 people, 3 people. So if one person if they just don't put their money together, but they drive, is it the driving in the car together that makes it illegal? So if 3 people pile in the car and drive, is that illegal also? This is so crazy. Every point that he's brought up. So with that being said, blah 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 blah. Okay, with that being said, I'll go ahead and end the debate. And trust me, it has been awesome and I appreciate it.